Jesus said in today's gospel, "Love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends if you follow my commandments." As a way into this sermon then, please, if you can, I'd like you now to think of someone that you love. Their face, their voice. What are they like? What kind of personality do they have? What kind of things might they say? For some of you, this exercise is pretty straightforward. You thought of the person that you thought you should have thought of. It's all clear and it's all fine. That's the person, the obvious person. And if I asked you to say who it was out loud, I've got a roving no. You wouldn't mind other people knowing. But for others, of course, you may not have been able to think of anyone, followed by a crashing sense of worry that you weren't able to think of anyone. For some of you, you thought of someone that you've lost, and it's made you so sad you can't really concentrate on what I'm saying right now. For others of you, you thought of someone who doesn't know that you love them, someone you think you probably shouldn't love, but actually the truth is, if you're honest, you know you do. For some of you, you thought of one of your children, then the others, or your grandchildren. For others of you, you didn't think of your children. Any of these might have caused you a bit of a stir. Love is a word that's said a lot in church, and it's said a lot the rest of the week too. Love is something that we think we agree on. It's something we think we know what it is. And we're supposed to be something of an expert if we say we're Christian, because it's the thing that Jesus talked a lot about, as he did in today's gospel. Love one another, he said, as I have loved you. So the easiest sermon in the world to preach today would be one where I explore the love that Jesus is talking about, then I list all the ways in which you and I don't live up to it, talk about the shortcomings, especially of the church, and then say, with a bit of a liturgical shrug, well, it's all very difficult, but let's do our best. Let's not give ourselves a hard time about it. Love's hard, and you know, who knows what it is anyway. That would be the easiest sermon to preach. I could illustrate it with stories of how hard it is to love, how we angst about it. I could remind us of other Bible stories about loving. But I don't really feel like preaching that sermon. I feel that if I preached that sermon, I would, even more than in other topics, be really searching for a way to avoid talking about real life. Because in talking about love, the biggest danger is that we fall into endless and draining cliches. And so I'm going to really try not to avoid telling some truth about love. It's a commonplace to say that the ways in which our society talks about love are pretty narrow. We've narrowed love to mean a set of feelings that are most evident in a short period of romantic sentiment that gets reduced, especially in films and TV, to a formulaic exchange, a build-up, a story building up to one individual saying to another individual, "I love you," and the expectation of the reply, "I love you too." It's a sort of a modern liturgy, like saying, "The Lord be with you and also with you. I love you too." This exchange is, of course, when it's meant, absolutely beautiful. But given the complex and ubiquitous ways of loving, it's important to say too that that's a restricted definition of love and what love is. Therefore, for the purposes of this sermon, I want to acknowledge its beauty and set it aside. If Jesus had carried a banner around with him or had been somebody with a catchphrase, it would arguably have been, "Love one another." He told people to do it, he lived it out, and yet as far as we know, he didn't go in for that one-to-one romantic exchange. "I love you, I love you too. In contemporary conversations about love, there's a lot of discussion about our own agency and our own choice. Our power. It's often said that we have a right to love, of course. It's a key aspect of, for example, LGBTQ campaigning. Of course you can't help if you fall in love with. Of course that's true. But the love that's characteristic of Christians isn't so much choosing and claiming this right to love. I really do sometimes think that an over-individualistic focus on our own choices and agency can become, when it's overemphasized anyway, a form of idolatrous fantasy. We aren't, despite the yearning of the poets, usually masters of our own destiny or captains of our fate. To some degree, of course, but not fundamentally. We're subject to the immensely complex dynamics and desires of others, their exercise of power alongside ours. And we're also subject to the vagaries of our own bodies, our strengths, our sicknesses. We're often, too, at the mercy of uninvited dreams and thoughts of the night. So much of our life is frankly unchosen. And so rather than focusing on a right to love, I want to try to talk about learning to love in the middle of what we have not chosen. Because it seems to me that it's that sort of love too that's at the heart of the gospel. If it's loving in the day-to-day life that Jesus embodied, then it's loving amidst the unchosenness of life. When you wanted love, but you didn't find it. When you mistook love for lust. When you didn't recognize love when it was there. When you and I have made some choices which mean that we live now in loveless relationships. Or when you're losing helplessly someone that you love. How to love in those circumstances. In that beautiful poem about love that St. Paul wrote elsewhere in the New Testament, he said that love is patient and kind. And the way it seems to me that Jesus loved was to exercise what you'll have heard me call before revolutionary patience. Living now, but according to another timetable, another set of priorities. Jesus stayed beside people as they worked things out for themselves. He answered anxious questions, usually with another patient question. He taught the timeliness of healing and the timeliness of dying. And what theologians call the Christ event, the whole event of Christ's living, dying, rising that we're celebrating this Eastertide, is marked by revolutionary patience, which I'm suggesting is love in the context of sacrifice, understanding in a profound way the unchosenness of much of life, not mistaking our proper human agency for a godlike autonomy, free from anyone or anything else, but instead a real and profound recognition of our interdependence with one another and with all things. Jesus' words in the gospel are embarrassingly clear. Love one another. I want to suggest then that the love that Jesus is talking about is love that has that characteristic of revolutionary patience, distinctive and challenging, loyal to the law of love, willing only to obey the command to forgive, energetic in its resolve to live, and willing always to try to find ways to give itself away. This kind of love is lived with a courage that's only real when it's tried, only evident when it's tried out, not afraid to get things wrong, will risk saying the wrong thing, will risk overstepping the mark. Love risks its own reputation in the service of another way. St. James's vocation, the church's calling in society, is to embody that love in public. And we can't mistake that sort of love for a quietist or compliant doormat sort of love. This love, love one another as I have loved you, for the church in public, is characterized by a redeemed humility that will listen more than speak, that will be energetic and proactive in finding ways to serve, that will retain a voice independent of any particular political party, single issue campaign, interest group, company, industry, or government. And in the context of that love in public, I want to say something briefly about St. James's in particular. We embarked a couple of years ago on what we've called the Wren Project, pledging hours and energy to a scheme that will amplify and deepen our ability to express this love in public. Inclusive love, so that, for example, anyone who uses a wheelchair can move to any part of our church or garden without having to ask for help. Opening up our buildings, increasing green space, formulating an innovative and creative program for young people called the Changemaker Program, and leaning into the ethos of this church inspired by the gospel, honed by you over decades, where people from all faiths and none are welcome, and the creativity of the human spirit is known in itself to be an expression of the presence of God. The Wren Project is not spending money in order to ossify and beautify a historic building in order to make it smarter for smart people to appreciate. It's a statement of intent and a statement of our values, that the church exists in society for the benefit of the people who do not belong to it. That when we imagine a better world together with God, we ask ourselves practical questions, not lose ourselves in idle thought. What can you and I do today to express that love that makes that new future more likely and that makes that inclusive future inevitable? We can't mistake agency for singular autonomy. We can act, but much of what we live with, we haven't chosen. And this statement that inclusive, courageous love matters in society has led us to form a set of relationships with people who might want to help make this happen. And in the jargon, it's called development and fundraising. I've learned a lot in the past 2.5 years. I've met literally hundreds of people in that context that I'd never met before, who work, live, and visit this place. It's wrapped up extremely unhelpfully often in British concepts of class and money. It leads us into murky waters of economic exploitation, an examination of moral integrity, purity, a recognition that this church building was probably built in part with funds derived from the transatlantic slave trade. It's introduced people in this physical parish, not necessarily here in the gathered congregation on a Sunday, to this way of being church that has been for them transformational. This is complex love in public. And love in public is the pursuit of justice. Members of this church with others went on a prayer walk around this area last week with Christian Climate Action to pray outside oil and gas companies, shops, helicopter manufacturers, highlighting practices and vested interests of which humanity as a whole must lay at this altar in penitence. I was moved and convicted as I joined in prayer on the street. And I want to say to you, as your priest and as the priest of this parish and of St. Pancras, that I remain resolutely uncynical about the development and fundraising journey that we're on. sometimes skeptical, but never cynical. The journey we're on in realizing the Wren project carries risk. Of course it does, because at its heart is love and the exercise of economic power, not least by us, in the service of that love. And we will never give up that focus and that commitment on love itself. Please do come to talk about all this on the 9th of June, just in a few weeks' time. We're holding another Wren Project meeting after church to discuss anything anyone would like to talk about related to the project, with a particular focus on the fundraising. We are, in all our strategizing, fundraising, praying, studying, feeding, budgeting, committed to, irreducibly committed to, at the heart of all we are doing, love. The love at the heart of this gospel, then, isn't individualistic sentiment or a collection of warm feelings that dissipate as soon as the winds of political complexity start to blow it about. Love can involve refusal, and it does involve refusal to be bought or sold or used, or even more importantly, to start to see other human beings only as people that the church can itself ask for funds. This gospel love is commitment to a patience that is at once steely and revolutionary, a refusal to be made bitter or mean, judgmental or even verbally violent, a deep and prayerful recognition that I can hardly live with the knowledge that I'm complicit in the violence of the world and in society's injustices, because I'm taught by this gospel that we are fundamentally interdependent, connected by our creation to one another and to all that lives. And so I pray for the strength to live with this knowledge and to resist its complicit power, but to take action anyway. This gospel love is political, communal, and personal, and will insist that despair is not an option, that love in public is the search for justice, and love in action is service. But at the root of our life together has to be that love. Gathering at this Eucharist, we take part in a broken-hearted celebration of that love that's embodied in the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. And in that life, we learn that love can't be separated from risk or grief. And so you, just as you are today, whatever your answer was to that opening question, you are precious here. You are loved here. And you're invited to love more, even in the middle of circumstances you have not chosen. Our own brokenheartedness finds a place at this table where we pray we will too find joy and revolutionary patience that gives us the strength to love, even in, no, especially in, the violence of these days. Amen.